Hi everyone, my name is Zach, and in this video we take a look on how to create base meshes in Blender. If you watched all previous videos, you probably know what a base mesh is, but to summarize it, it's a basic shape we need to create to sculpt on. You can do it in any detail level you like, but in general you keep it pretty simple. Just create the basic forms of your object and all the detailed stuff you do in sculpt mode. So there are different ways to create a base mesh. In general, you can use a sphere, and if you use dynamic topology, you can create a whole character out of it. But it's nice and it makes the whole process easier if we prepare a nice base mesh, which already represents the shape we want to create. So a base mesh needs to be a mesh object. That's it. So now you can go crazy with all the tools, everything you have in Blender to create your base meshes. There are some common ways to do it, but you have no restrictions in general, because you can just use any object you have, combine them and create the base mesh you like. In this video I want to show you a few common ways to do it so that you get an idea on how to create it, and in the later practical part we will also create real base meshes for sculptings. In this video we will only talk about creating base meshes for dynamic topology sculpting, because in this course we want to focus on dynamic topology. Okay, let's start with method number 1 I'm using, and this is basically a simple cube with a subsurf modifier on it. So if I select the basic cube, then I simply press Ctrl 3 for example, then it adds a subsurf modifier with 3 subdivisions. And now I would switch to edit mode, and inside edit mode I can disable this button here, limit selection to visible, and now I can select also the parts which I'm not seeing from my camera perspective. And now for example I can press E for extruding and move the vertices around. Simply with S I can scale, with R I can rotate, and with G I can move. These are the very basics you need to know in Blender, and I hope if you are watching this video you already know the basics from Blender. Alright, so I simply can select these vertices, move them around. With Ctrl R I can add loop cuts, so with left click I can place them, and then I can change the shape how I like. So if this should be something like a dinosaur, you can pretty fast create the basic shape just with extruding and using the basic operations in the edit mode. This is one way, and then if you want to add, for example, limbs, arms, legs and so on, you can add another cube, for example, add another subsurf modifier and a mirror modifier, and then we can add the arms, for example. So this is a very simple and quick example. This would be one way, and I recommend in general you don't need to create the fingers, the toes and all these tiny details at this point, because you simply can add them later. So if you're sculpting the main shapes of the body, then later on you can add, for example, another cube, put a subsurf on it, and then create one finger, just a very quick one, and then put it on the hand, just like this, for example. Imagine that the rest of the character is already sculpted with the first detail level. And then you add the fingers and toes and horns or whatever, and this is working pretty well. So you always can extend your base mesh or your sculpting with other objects. So if you're done with your base mesh, you can start sculpting, but you have to apply the subsurf modifier. And if you are using the Sculpt Tools add-on, you simply can select all objects and then press Apply Mods. And then you can see all the modifiers were applied. And then you can join those pieces if you like. Select both of them and then click Union. Or if you're using the Speed Sculpt add-on, you can use this operation. Let's subdivide this in the detail size for 4. Let's try this, and then I click Union, and then everything is smoothed at the same time. So this is one way to use this. And in general, I won't show this again and again because this joining of the different parts is always the same. You just have to apply the modifiers or convert this into a mesh if it's not a mesh. And then you can unify the different parts with a Boolean operation. So this is important. It will not work if you simply select both of them and then click on join, because if I switch to wireframe view, you can see these parts are simply stick together and not really connected. So, and if I use this union operation, you can see that these parts are now really connected. And that's important because if I now switch to sculpt mode and then start sculpting here, you can see if I smooth this area, it's pretty easy to make one nice shape out of these connected parts. So the next common way to create a base mesh is using the skin modifier. So if you watched the video about the Speed Sculpt add-on, there you had the quick option to add a skin modifier. So if you have this add-on, I recommend using this option there, but I show you now how to do it manually. So I simply add a cube. Inside edit mode, I press Alt M and then add center. And then all the vertices of this cube are merged. So we have only one vertex left. So here's one vertex we have. And now let's just add a skin modifier. And then you can see we have a cube here. And now if I extrude this vertex using E, and I press Z for the Z axis, then you can see that this mesh will be built around the edge. But for creating a nice base mesh, it's great if the shape is rounded, and in this case we simply add a subsurf modifier with, for example, 2 subdivisions. And now you can create a shape out of this simple edges. So, and as you can see, I also can extrude more than 2 edges out of one vertex here. But you have to take care if you choose 2 crazy angles here, it really fast happens that there will be these errors, as you can see here. And if you have something like this in your model and want to start sculpting, this can cause many problems. So I recommend checking your model twice so that all the parts are covered with a nice polygon structure. So, and as you can imagine, in this way you simply can create also characters. So if I'm adding a mirror modifier, let's add a mirror, move it up, and then if I'm moving this out, you can see it's working pretty nice, also in combination with the mirror modifier. And then you can create characters pretty fast. So this modifier was really built to create base meshes in Blender quickly. And the nice thing is you also can scale the parts. So I simply select one vertex, then I press Ctrl A, and you can see I can scale this. So if you want to make part thinner or thicker, you can do it. And you also can scale in the Y or the X direction. So it behaves a little bit strange because it's more like a 2D scaling here. So if you press Ctrl A and then, for example, X, you can see how this behaves. And if you press Y, you can see how this behaves. So you can do pretty quick base meshes here, pretty fast. And if we enable clipping, this works even better. As you can see, you can create shapes pretty quick, especially for characters. Now let's check the options we have here. So first of all, we have this root point here. And it's always a little bit hard to describe what this does, but as you can see, all the shapes, especially here, are somehow flowing to this root point. So, and if I select this point in the middle here and make this as a root, you can see how this is changing. So it's always good to take a point in the middle of your object, like the hips or something, to mark this as root point. And if you have no root point, like let's mark this as root point and then delete this, you can see we have no shape. So it's important that you have this root point. Also, you can define a symmetry axis, as you can see here. In this case, it's X. You also can say Y. And I think it's just for the skin modifier to know how the flow of these polygons should be created. So in this case, it's X. So just go sure to enable the x-axis. Then, for example, if you want to add another part, like I simply duplicated one vertex, Shift D, and then I want to create some ears or horns or anything, then you can see if I only duplicated one vertex, the skin modifier don't applies on this edge here, so I have to create a new root, as you can see, and then this is working. Let's scale this. So then we have this branch smoothing. As you can see, in this way we can smooth the areas in which the vertices or the edges are connected. So in some cases this gives a little bit better result, as you can see. And then we have this mark loose and clear loose option. So for example, if I don't want to take this vertice in account, I simply click on mark loose, and then you can see that these points here are connected, like in this way. And the skin modifier skips this point here. So, and if you don't want to have this anymore, simply select this and then clear loose. Then we have the option equalize radii. If you have scaled one or more vertices in a certain axis, like the x or the y axis, you can select this vertice and then equalize radii, and then you can see it now has this round shape back again. So this is also a nice feature. So in the last option we have here is the smooth shading. As you see, it then gets smooth shaded. So I now have two parts here, this horn things and the whole body. But if I want to use this in sculpt mode, you remember we have to union this with the Boolean operation. So in this case, I select the horns, I press P, selection, and now I have this separate objects in object mode. And if you want to use this for sculpting now, you have to also apply all modifiers. That means I simply select both objects, click apply mods. Now all modifiers are applied. Then I select both and click on union. And if I switch to sculpt mode, enable dynamic topology, and now you can see we can easily join the two parts and we can start sculpting on this object and create a crazy creature. Alright, but about sculpting in detail we will talk about later. So another way I want to show you for creating base meshes is using metaballs. So simply press Shift A, metaball, and then add whatever you like, for example a ball. And then if you simply duplicate this object, Shift and D, you can see these objects are already like a fluid merged together. And you also can scale these objects like this. And in this way you easily can add these different shapes to your object and also create your base mesh. Over here in the properties editor, under object data, we have the settings for the metaballs, and you can see that we can change the resolution. So if I decrease this, you can see it improves the resolution of these objects. Then we have the threshold. You can see we are changing basically the distance of the objects where they should be merged. The objects will then be scaled. And yeah, it's a funny way for creating base meshes, but in the most cases I don't use this. I use this a lot if I want to create something like fire, because it's a little bit hard with the other methods to create something that has more than one part. So if I delete all that, let's simply add a ball. And now you can simply add this little dots here and there and simply duplicate this. So you can create this kind of flame base mesh you then can sculpt on. And if I increase the resolution, this works better. And yeah, this should only be a base mesh, keep that in mind. This doesn't look like fire, but if you sculpt on that and add a little bit more details, then this could look like fire or anything like this. Or if you want to create some fluid effects, then this can also be used for that. One thing you have to consider is that this is a metaball object and not a mesh object. That means I can't go to sculpt mode. If I select this, I first have to convert this into a mesh. So I press Alt C and then mesh from curve meta surf text, Click on that. And now we have this mesh object. This stuff I can delete. And also if I enable flat shading, we can see it a bit better that a lot of vertices are lying very close together. And you can either add a smooth modifier and repeat this. Or what I would recommend to either use the option from the Sculpt add-on, this remesh option here. You can see we have a better subdivision, or you simply can add the remesh modifier and then change the values here. And I would recommend to use the smooth mode, then you have much better results. Then we can change the resolution, as you can see. And on this mesh, it's way better to sculpt on instead of the standard mesh the metaballs are creating. So simply apply this modifier, switch to sculpt mode, and then you can see it's pretty good and easy to sculpt on that. So the next thing I want to show you are curves. So you also can work with curves, especially if you want to do something like ropes, snails, dragons, or whatever that has a long cylindrical shape. You certainly can also use a cylinder and shape it in edit mode, but with a curve in most cases you have your result even faster. So I add a path curve here, then I go to the curve settings, the fill type under shape I set to full. And then I increase the depth, you can see, and with the resolution, I can make it round. So if I now switch to edit mode, I can shape this curve. And with E, I can extrude this, so I extend this. And with Alt S, you also can scale this, similar like in the skin modifier settings, just other shortcut. So I can change the scaling or scale it to 0 if I like. I also can duplicate the whole thing and make another shape here. Then I have to separate this again, P separate if I have select one of them. And then I have to convert these two things. So press Alt C again, mesh from curve, meta serve text. And now, as you can see, we have two mesh objects. And then with the standard union options, you can unify them if you like. And then you can start sculpting. So also this, as you can see, is working fine. So the last thing I want to show you here is either using Make Human. It's a free tool for creating human bodies. You can also import into Blender, or the similar manual Bastioni Lab. It's basically also for creating characters, but just right inside Blender. So you don't have to import or export anything. So if you want to have this is also a free add-on you can download on manualbastioni.com. There you can download this tool and then you have to install it as usual in the user preferences. And then you have this tab in the tool shelf here, and here we can select basic body we want to create. For example, a fantasy female elf. Then I click on init character and there you have it. And as you can see, you have a lot of tools. You can change the age, the mass, and so on. There are many settings you can adjust to create a nice character and also a nice base mesh for sculpting. Yeah, this is basically what I want to show you about the pure technical part on creating base meshes. And certainly you can combine all the showed methods to create your base meshes. So just be free and use the tools you need to create your base mesh. And yeah, the creative part on creating base meshes for a specific project we will learn a little bit later.